I'm Cash the Composer, and today we are in Columbia, South Carolina to visit two very special women. One is a historian of sorts who has a storied family history running back generations that connects her to the subject of my new musical, Lavinia Fisher. And that would be the second woman that we're visiting today, the bones of the famed first female serial killer in America, Lavinia Fisher. So let's go see them. All right, while I get buckled up, we're gonna head on over to the house where Lavinia's bones lay. In the meantime, go ahead and subscribe to the channel before we get there. Ring that little bell to be notified with the release of each new video so you don't miss a thing. All right, everybody, so this is Carolyn Gilmore, and this is her lovely home, and she is in possession of Lavinia's bones. Her ancestor, JLB Gilmore, dug them up, and she's going to tell us the story.
These are from Hoyan Ford. It was a ship that sank in 1450 off of Vietnam. My son's ex-wife was Vietnamese, and they had a Vietnamese ceremony. But for a gift for the grandmother and the great-grandmother, I got these little jarlets came up. And if you run this barcode, you can find out where on the ship they found it. Obviously, I collect cameos.
Oh, wow.
This is an old ledger from Holly Hill. I used to have two of them. A lot of the people that you would know are in the ledger because they went to the store where the Connors were. That's Frederick Connor. I have his wife, Martha. We have, when they have the reunion in our family, it's the Connor family reunion because they were the originals, but they actually came over with a Gilmore, 3 Gilmores. So they knew them in the old country too.
How far back have
That's
you...
my grandfather. That's my grandmother on my father's side. The
How far back
Gilmore.
have you been able to trace your family history?
Depends on who you want to know about. This is my grandfather's sister. Her name was Mary Dwella Gilmore. She painted that picture up there.
Oh, wow.
That's the old family Bible. My great-grandfather, the doctor, adopted 2 kids, and they're listed in the Bible. And it was during an outbreak of diphtheria, 1850s, I guess. There was another doctor from Ireland, and his wife, his son, and his wife, another daughter-in-law, and all the other children all died of diphtheria. It creates like a membrane in the back of the throat. They'll choke to death, which is a good reason to have vaccinations like the DPT shot.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, so he wound up adopting 2 kids, and that's why they're in the family. My dad did the picture of Mom Emma, was a woman that took care of him after his mother died. And then he drew a little picture of himself sitting with Mom Emma in the kitchen. She was the only one. He was the only one that could sit in the kitchen with her. And those are different things from my grandfather and great-grandfather. That's my great-grandfather. That's my grandfather.
Oh.
That's a viewing ticket for an operating room up at Bellevue where my grandfather had his residency. And
Bellevue, New York?
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's the famous one.
And he took his wife all over. He went to Minnesota. She had developed cancer of the bladder, I think, to get help. So they went all over. Sinclair's is the southernification of Sinclair, and there was a neurologist who was very famous, and he moved up to Philadelphia and married into the Rockefeller family. My grandfather had letters to all these different doctors, and later you find out they're all relatives. They're all related to us somehow. There's the Gilmores that came over. It was a Gilmore married to a Kennedy. Another thing they'll have is Kennedy, spelled C-A-N-A in the South, you know, but it's Kennedy. That woman's had the Sinclair line in her. She came over.
Do you have any pictures of JLB Gilmore, the guy who
Yeah,
dug up the
I've
bones?
made you some pictures and things already. I'm on Ancestry with 155,000 relatives or something like that. And also I wrote the History and Archives.
Oh.
And got the whole trial transcript for Lavinia, but I haven't read it yet. Oddly enough, my great-grandfather, JLB Gilmore Sr., who dug up Lavinia, His wife was a Hart, and Eliza Hart, and her father was William Hart, and he was the foreman of the jury that convicted Lavinia. Everybody is tied to everybody else in the South, and I will show you Lavinia. I got her back. She went down all the doctors in the family, and I got her back because my cousin Bill Gilmore was a pediatrician in Greenville. And my father had dropped off the skull. He knew nothing about it. He says, "What does it say?" In the eye socket, it says SCMC for South Carolina Medical College, which is where my great grandfather and my grandfather, and a lot of the others in the family. And by the way, there's a sixth generation relative descendant of J.O.B. Gilmore. His name is James Wells. He goes by Jimmy. His father's Jim, and his father's father was my first cousin, James Gilmore. They're all James. We go back to a Dennis Gilmore, though, by the way. So after he died, I sent a picture of a dollhouse I had done, and this looks like him, and this is his picture on the desk, and he's handing some Valium to a mother doll over here because her children all have the measles and they're ransacking the office. And there back on the shelf is Lavinia, that little skull. And so when I sent it to her, she called and she said, "Would you like Lavinia back?" And I said, "Well, yeah." So I drove down from Virginia and got Lavinia back, and that's where it stayed. Supposedly, Lavinia had long, dark hair.
I haven't been able to find like any descriptions of her anywhere.
And they say at the trial, the person said she was Peoples, who was also really the man. This is how the misconcepts go. This is Roy Gilmore, who wrote a history of Holly Hill. Town grows around a tree. As you can see, he has a dress on Facebook in Charleston before 1900. They were saying why little boys had dresses for so long. I gave all these esoteric reasons, and I said, it ought to be obvious before somebody's toilet trained. I mean, you cannot, there were no Huggies, there were no Pampers. You only did the wash if the weather was good once a week. Left them in a dress and just free to the breeze. And they did the same with Lavinia. It was like, I've got different books on Lavinia around here that people have written, and they said, "Oh, they didn't kill anybody." Well, they did. And then they said, well, they would have raised the house because I have a map of 1820 when she was hanged, and the house is still there. It's marked. They said they would have dug up the bones. I said, well, in the first place, there were no phones. There was no DNA. If somebody was traveling, you had no idea where they stayed. All I know is that there were trap doors, and she and her husband would come out of the trap doors. They would dump the body of the person in the room after they stole their stuff under the house. If you found it, you wouldn't know who it was. You wouldn't know how they got killed. You wouldn't know how long they've been there. It was pointless. A guy named John Peoples, who is John Peoples the first, he was traveling. He was in his room. He saw John and Lavinia sneaking in his room, and he ran. And they came after him. And so what they were convicted of was highway robbery. Lavinia apparently attacked him, and that's when he said she was a large woman.
Yeah.
I've been wondering if you're going to do something like Sweeney Todd.
Well, I personally love Sweeney Todd. It's one of my favorite musicals ever. It was one of the first musicals I was ever in. I actually got to see it on Broadway last year.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I love Sondheim. I love Sweeney Todd. It is definitely a big inspiration for me.
There's Lavinia's skull. There's Lavinia. There is my great-grandfather. His real father was not a Gilmore. His real father was a Fraser. Mary Gilmore. The reason I think Mary might have had issues and might have been Lavinia. As teenagers, this fellow, Frederick Fraser II, moved next to them. and they lived in Cane Hoy on Daniel Island. They were all teenagers. Mary had a half sister. He had two younger sisters. So I figure they all got together, as they do. And my great grandfather came along. He was born in a year that had no summer, they said.
1816?
Yeah. It was
I
when
read all about that.
Frankenstein was written.
Yep,
The cold, dreary
at
thing.
the Villa Diodati. Yeah, my last musical that I wrote was about that whole summer with Lord Byron,
Oh,
Percy
really?
Shelley, all that. Yeah, I'll invite you whenever we have the production. You get a free seat.
Yeah. Anyway, he dumped her. What he had to say to his son by his marriage later was, don't marry the first girl you see, basically. Hold out her money, which is what he did. Perhaps that gave her some issues. And so maybe she was Mary Lavinia. And the other reason is that Mary died the same year that Lavinia was hanged. One thing I cannot reconcile is how my great-grandfather would have known where to dig her up, because ordinarily people who were hanged went to a pauper's grave.
Yeah, the Potter's Field under what's now
Potter's
MSC.
Field, yeah. He had some inside information. Now his grandfather, who raised him as if he were his son, but he wasn't, Dennis Gilmore. He was a judge and tax assessor, property appraiser, and so forth. Apparently, she was married, died, and was buried like 67 miles away from where they lived, which seems a little strange to me. And on her tombstones, it just says, here lies poor, unfortunate Mary Gilmore. As a cousin said to me, and why? Why was Mary so unfortunate? I said, I don't know. So I just wondered. But there's somebody else on Ancestry who claims her at this point, but I don't know.
It's very
Anyway.
tricky trying to trace through the historical records and figure out what goes where,
Yeah.
who's related to
Well, there have been surprising things. The Fraser thing was you could only get paternity test for DNA at first. On both sides of my family, the male that I chose to take the test, and Bill Gilmore did the test for the Gilmores, did not match anybody else in the study. So it's like, what goes on here? So I had a second cousin once removed. It was my father's older brother's grandson. We made a deal that whichever one of us died first was going to let the other one know who the great grandfather really was. We came to the conclusion that Mary was the mother. There had been whispers or whatever, but everything else, everybody thought they were taking it to their grave until DNA came along. I was saying Holly Hill Plantation was where JLB lived. That was his plantation. But the house came to him. There was a Gideon Bunch and his wife, Mary Hilliard Gilmore. He was descended from the first black slave in America, John Bunch, who came over on the Mayflower. And he had a child with a Quaker woman, and the child was freed. And after that, the Bunches came down, and I'm related on my mother's side, interestingly enough. But on my father's side, they came down to South Carolina. On tax records, they were listed as mulattoes. The governor came out and said, well, you look white to me. The Gilmore house, they had that. And then he married Eliza Hart. She's over there, little dark woman. She was a Sephardic Jew. The Harts gave all their extra land, almost everything, to JLB. So we got the house and that. I was into collecting. I do miniatures, so miniature portraits. And there is a Charles Fraser from Charleston who painted a lot of little miniature portraits. I had one of his books on my lap,
Yeah, I've seen some of them at the Gibbs Art Museum. Yeah.
He's Frederick Fraser's, this one's father's brother. There's a whole bunch of Frasers, though. They got the house there. Beaufort was their main house, because over in Scotland, at the north end of Loch Ness, is Beaufort, which is their family castle. For a while, they lived there, and then they moved back. So my cousin, he had prostate cancer, and somebody called to tell me he had died, and I had that book out, and I thought, I don't know, I look at the haplotype thing for the Frasers, and it was an exact match for my cousin. So I said, well, thanks, Sam. So that's how I got that. And then on my mother's side, an aunt sent me a picture of all these bunches at a family reunion. We wondered because my cousin who was tested on that side for the new family, NEW, he didn't match anybody. And in fact, the guy who was head of the study said, he doesn't match anybody in Great Britain, you know. I didn't know what that meant at the time, but then I'm looking at the haplotype and thinking, it looks like Africa, you know. But I thought, well, I'll have to look up something later and see if I can figure it out. But I'd already seen the bunches because I was doing other stuff. And then my aunt sent me a picture of the bunches at a family reunion for the new family. And they had married all these new sisters. And I thought, let me compare their DNA to my cousins, and voila, more bunches. My neurologist had said that she had upper teeth when she died, but no lower teeth. She used to hang between the medical school and the old museum. I used to love the shrunken heads, rather, in the old museum when I was a kid. And somebody's grandmother, they said on Ancestry, said they had once seen hanging there. And she was labeled Lavinia Fisher. Oh,
There's the
that's the map. 6 miles out of Charleston. It used to be. There's Daniel Island. And it's just across. It's not very far. 6 Mile Inn is somewhere. It's on the other side of the river. Conveniently enough, on the state road. So I'm missing the 6 one. This is the jaw. You can see the little wires and stuff. Used to be attached. I guess it's fallen. Some scapula.
Hi, Lavinia. And
That was what I was gonna do with the little things about the depth of her.
get the
Yeah,
jaw.
that these. But I don't think there's anything else. It's just that's at the base somewhere. So that's yeah. There you go. There you go. Okay, let's go eat that.
Hello, my baby. Hello, my honey. Hello, my ragtime gal. Send me a kiss, my wife. Yeah, hear me, baby. My heart's on fire.
Told people that I had the bones of Lavinia. I had the skull of Lavinia Fisher. Everybody on Facebook got on my case was like, "Go put her back. You can't have that. It's not legal. Put her in the ground where she belongs." You know, blah blah. Medical doctor in our family said it's perfectly fine for her to have the skull. I was taking her to the Antique Roadshow to be evaluated, and I invited a friend in here. And when I said I was taking Lavinia to be assessed, she said she was not riding in the car with evil. Kind of have to face that, I guess. And so I got to the Antique Roadshow, and they looked at it a long time. I thought they would be interested because Lavinia, after all, came from Charleston. She was in the old jail for a year in Charleston. She got hanged in Charleston. After a while, they came back to me and they said, though my provenance was excellent, she was not deemed appropriate for their target audience. However, to somebody interested in that sort of thing, she'd be worth about $3,000.
Yeah.
Well, I've got other stuff from the family. My great grandfather's medical set. These are their pestles. This one's my grandfather's. Great Gaillard, yeah. And the other one's Dr. Gaillard's.
Here's a little
As
violin.
Oh yeah, I
oh,
saw the little tiny violin.
Here's a violin.
I'm a professional violinist. That's my day
oh,
job.
I know, yeah. My son gave me a little self-playing violin. My grandfather opened a drugstore because he said you couldn't even get gel caps to put medicine in Holly Hill. So that's the thermometers from his drugstore. There's a bottle over here. It's got caffeine in it, supposedly. But anyway, it's labeled from his drugstore. And these were Civil War era And this was Dr. Mims. Dr. Mims, when my great grandfather couldn't get his inheritance, his grandmother had been Mary Mims. Went to a doctor, James Mims, and James Mims was like a holistic type herbal doctor. And I saw in American History and Archives, he applied for a doctor's license, and South Carolina refused to give it to him. He later moved to Georgia, and he had 3 sons, and all 3 of them became doctors of the real type. This is one of his books, and it's kind of interesting. It's about children's diseases and stuff.
I wish Kevin had come. He'd love looking at that. My boyfriend's a doctor. Love seeing that.
This is like a Civil Warrior, I guess. This one my great grandfather had it. Daguerreotypes, one of the hearts, ambroglio-types, which are on glass, and they have to be against a background. And then the chin types, so these are all relatives. And my mother thought they were, she said, oh, these are people we don't know. Some of them were my grandfather's sisters and stuff like that. So, and this is my great grandmother. My great grandfather was a little more flamboyant. My grandfather was a really nice man. He was always sitting on the porch, they said, but he farmed. He raised prize cattle and pigs or something. He was head of the bank. He was superintendent of the school. He was head of the Methodist Sunday school. He ran a little newspaper. They had the mail service themselves, actually. And then he had the drugstore, and they had a soda fountain thing going in there. And when I was in Virginia, we used to get a paper from Fredericksburg, Virginia, called the Freelance Star. And somebody talked, I never heard a bad word ever about him. So I was looking in the newspaper, somebody recalled that they went on a trip down to South Carolina, and they went to a still in the wagon. My grandfather was very proud of his team of horses and his carriage until he got his Model T there. He said they went to his still. They had the still. Oh, so that's what my dad would always say. If he ever had a sip of sherry, he'd say, this is for medicinal purposes. But my great-grandfather, there are all these other stories, and there's one where he went somewhere he shouldn't. I don't know where it was. Told the slave driving him not to tell his wife. He told her. So my great-grandfather apparently whipped the slave. My great-grandmother found out about it. So she waited until he fell asleep. She tied his arms to the bedpost, and she whipped him. And they actually were very happy, but she was a small, feisty woman, apparently. But it was like my dad said, if he was going to pull a tooth, he'd do it from his horse so he could gallop away with it, stuff like that. His specialty was women's reproduction, and they actually read his thesis in medical school,
Really?
still down in Charleston.
Wow.
On women's anatomy, and he was one of the first people in the New World to take up a cesarean. He did a cesarean on a Black woman, and I hope they had some anesthesia, but I don't know.
One can hope.
Like I said, he kind of gypped out of his inheritance by the half-sister. They were Warnocks. Dennis Gilmore was married to Anna Warnock. The Warnocks used to have cane hoy, but the plantation actually was gone by then. It was occupied during the Revolution by the English and destroyed. But he always lived at Cane Hoy, he said. Lived and died at Cane Hoy. I've never found his grave. I don't know where it is.
I'm so impressed at how well you've kept track of your family history and how much you've built out from the little information that's left from the
Well, like
decades
I
past.
said, people think that they've hidden stuff that they think is, detrimental to the family.
In the late 70s, television news channels began to play 24 hours a day. At that time, a woman named Marion Stokes began to record the news on VHS, tens of thousands of tapes up to her death in 2012. People thought this was endearing or mad, hoarding or compulsion, eccentric or crazy. Her family supported her project, she even recruited folks to help out. But that didn't stop some people from questioning her behavior, dismissing this woman as a weird old lady. Regardless of what others believed, her archives are an incredible record, significantly valuable for so many reasons. You see, Marion is a prime example of a not often celebrated aspect of scholarship, that the historical record is carried on the backs of weird old ladies. So let's all thank Carolyn and all the women like her who have sought to support our history. I hope you enjoyed this interview with Carolyn. I know I did. She is a fascinating woman with a lot of fascinating stories to tell. I have asked a forensic artist to take the various images I have of Lavinia's remains and reconstruct her face. However, that's just one man's perspective. I'd love to see your perspective too. All you lovely artists out there in the audience, I challenge you to show me, what do you think Lavinia looked like? Draw your best interpretation of her face and send it to me at theviladiodati@gmail.com. I'm so excited to see what y'all can come up with. Go ahead and subscribe to see all of your art featured on a future video alongside that of the forensic artist. In the meantime, go check out my video from last week, in which a hilarious and compelling ghost tour guide, my amazing friend Laura, tells Lavinia's story, including stories of her own haunting by Lavinia's ghost. See y'all next time. Bye-bye.
Is that a paper when Hitler was dead?
Oh, yeah, my dad sent that. My dad
Nice.
was a medic at the storming of Normandy. Let me show you something kind of neat my father sent me from the war. He sent scenes of Germany, a land of broad horses and women. He sent France, and he sent England.